I think that the greatest need that I know anything about is the need of prayer. I know we all pray. I know that every one of you pray. But is there anyone here that would say every time I pray something happens, something wonderful happens? Well, when Jesus prayed, wonderful things happened. And when we pray, things just as wonderful could happen if we really knew that prayer works by laws, spiritual laws, that are just as fixed as the laws of arithmetic. They can be learned just as easily as we learn the laws of arithmetic. And when we follow them, and we do not make any mistakes, we get the answers. Just as surely as you get answers in arithmetic or physics or chemistry or anything else. When you know the laws and obey the laws, you do get the answers. And that's that way when we are coming to learn the art of prayer. And prayer is an art. It is an art that has to be practiced and studied and proved. And if it works once, it works forever. For God's laws never change. They are dependable. Now, if there ever was a day when we need to know the art of prayer, it is today. For anyone that's thinking knows that today the United States is the civilization that God is dealing through to bring His purpose into being. And God's purpose for His world from the beginning of time was a kingdom of world brotherhood and love, of abundant living for everyone. Every child of His having an opportunity to express himself and contribute to the greater life of all. And every soul that God ever created does have something to offer, something to give the world, and yet most of them do not know it. Most of us have never found that place that God made it possible for all of us to be and to do and to feel. He's the only one that can lead us into it. And He cannot lead us into it until we willingly offer our all to Him. And let Him. God never makes us be what He wants us to be. He's always waiting to lead us. But we have to be willing to be led. And so if we're going to learn the art of prayer and take hold of the power that is available to make this earth like heaven, to bring peace on earth, and it will never come on any other terms except the terms of the Prince of Peace. We're going to have to learn the art of prayer and take hold of this power that is available. Most of us have accepted so very, very little. I remember hearing our wonderful Bishop Arthur Moore. I hope you ministers know our Bishop Arthur Moore. He's one of those great noblemen of the Spirit. And he was the guest speaker in our Virginia conference. We never had the privilege of having him as our own bishop, but several times we've had him as our guest speaker in our conference. And I remember he was challenging our ministers in the conference, telling them that God was able to meet every need, and they needn't to get discouraged over the times. And this was just before World War II, when people were discouraged, when they thought they had made the great sacrifice in World War I that was going to end all wars, when we had trained a generation for peace. And if you were teaching Sunday school between the two world wars, you know that the emphasis of all the lessons were toward peace and brotherhood and love and no more wars. And that was the generation that we sent out to kill, you remember, in World War II. Well, we thought we'd ended all wars, and then came the Depression. And then we started up again. And then another war was looming up. And people really became discouraged. What's the use? If we make money, we just make it to give to the government. We'll never be out of debt. If we have a family, we're only raising up our boys to be shot down. What's the use? Well, Bishop Arthur Moore was really making them see that this is God's world. And let us ne'er forget that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. All power in heaven and earth is God's power. And there isn't any lesser power that's ever going to take it away from him eventually. He has to seem to let us fail and almost be lost, to find ourselves, to see that we cannot in our own strength and wisdom get by, that we must come to him and give back to him all these talents and opportunities and education that we have and let him direct it. And so he just, how he poured his heart out to these ministers, that no Christian has a right to be pessimistic. We are following a God of victory, and we are more than conquerors over anything if we follow him. And then he leaned over that pulpit, and he said, oh, dear brother, God is offering us the whole ocean of his resources, his wisdom, his power, his love, his plans, everything. And most of us have accepted about a teaspoonful. How much have you taken? How much have you really taken and believed and followed and used and proved? Everything that God gave to Jesus, he's offering to us, but on God's terms. And we can never take the greatness of God and the power of God and the wisdom of God, the resources of God and his great plan, and bring it into reality anyway but on his terms. And most of us haven't been willing to give up our little selves and our little ways and our little selfish ideas and say, you take over. You lead us in your way, and we'll follow. Remember, that's all Jesus ever asked of us. Just come follow me. That's all he asked of those disciples that he chose. And didn't he go to great lengths to find the poorest that could be found? Can you imagine him picking the 12 that he picked? Now, wouldn't you have thought when he knew that they weren't going out and earn their living, that he'd had one nice banker? Certainly one rich man. Wouldn't you have thought he would? He didn't. For if he had, they'd have depended upon that human power. And he was training them that God is the power that we're looking to and not the human. Wouldn't you have thought he'd had one nice, great, big religious leader so that the Hebrew people would have said, well, now this is orthodox. This is all right. Why, look who's in it. But he didn't. Wouldn't you have thought he'd had a good politician? It kind of takes a politician to get you going today. He didn't. He seemed to go to great lengths to get the very poorest that anyone could ever select. Ignorant, unlearned fishermen. Judas. Levi, a hated tax gatherer. Yes, but he knew that if they would come and follow him, and that's all he asked. Just come follow me. I will make you what? That's what he wants us to do. That's what he put every soul in the world to be, is a fisher of men. And when we're letting him live in us, and when we're letting him love through us and serve through us and pour his love through us, he'll win them. He'll draw them. As we lift him up in our lives and put ourselves down, he'll draw all men unto himself. You know, we know these things by heart, and we don't believe them, do we? Oh, you give your mental consent to it. But do you give your life to it? Give it all back to Him. Stop making your own choices and let Him lead you and make you and use you and fill you and break you if necessary. Most of us have to be broken before we're ready to be remolded. But that's the way Jesus did, and Jesus followed this way. He didn't come asking anything of others that He didn't do Himself. He let you know over and over, He's not here doing His own will. He's doing the will of His Father who sent Him. I came down from heaven not to do my will, but the will of my Father. Whose will are we following? Our own will? The wills of those around us that are trying to tell us what to do and how to do it, and be sure to do it fast. So many of us are under the dominion of others, and we do not have the stamina and the grace to say, I'm following His way. His way looks as though it might be a little harder, but it isn't. It's the only way that ever triumphs over everything and satisfies every inner urge. His way. Now, Jesus didn't take any credit for anything He did. And that's hard to lose too, isn't it? To lose yourself that no matter what you do, you don't want any credit for it. You don't want someone coming around and saying, my, how marvelous you are, to think that you could do that. He lets you know when they just gazed at Him in astonishment at the wonderful things He was saying. Why, He said, the things I'm giving you are only the words my Father gave me. Don't look at me in such amazement. The works I do, it's not I that's doing them, it's my Father in me that's doing the work. And those works are available to every one of us, and nothing's too hard. Not one thing is too hard. But the first law of prayer is that we've got to come and follow Him. We've got to yield our lives utterly and completely to Him and let Him make us into that personality that He can make us and use us as He would direct. And by lifting Him and losing our littleness, every hour He is using us in a way that we are not even dreaming of being used. Or we are not doing it, He's doing it. Now I'm talking about prayer. This isn't the usual way to talk about prayer, is it? I could give you these spiritual laws. Most of you, I imagine, have our little booklet that give you these spiritual laws, and they're so simple that anybody could follow them. An illiterate could follow them if he knew them. A little child could follow them more naturally and easily than lots of us adults that have gotten in a lot of extra rubbish, inhibitions and prejudices and criticisms and irritations and impatience and doubts and fears and pride and all these things that we pick up as we grow up. We have more to lose than a little child, and it's easier for a little child to have his prayers answered than an adult because it's more natural. Now we have here a set of 9 little booklets. They're 25 cents each, are they? 9 or $2. That will give you all these laws. I think this afternoon, maybe, unless you want it otherwise, I'll show you something that prayer does. Is that what you'd rather, or what do you want? I'll do anything you want. What do you want? You want some stories of what prayer can do? Or would you rather we talk about these conditions that you could read a book and find out for yourself now?
Tell us some of your stories about it.
All right, have you any particular kind of story? For with God all things are possible. There isn't anything impossible with God. And all my life the Lord has been trying to teach me this art of prayer. I am a product 3 times. Medical science couldn't do anything about it, but God did. And I know that there is no limitation. And if there's any certain thing you're more interested in than another, I'll tell a story along that type. If not, why, let's see. Well, this story kind of shows you how God guides. Or in prayer, when you really know these laws of prayer, and I'm going to quickly run over them. The first is a dedicated life. A life that isn't afraid to hand it all back to God and say, here it is, you direct it, you make it, you fill it, you use it. And then a great awareness that this Christ that you're dealing with is not somebody way up there in the heavens, that you've got to get his attention and you're not quite sure he's listening. You know, Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 13:3, and I usually quote Philip, the Christ you have to deal with is not a person outside you, but a tremendous power within you. I think that's one of the greatest things that we have to recognize when we are ready to pray. You're not trying to attract the attention of God up there. He's everywhere, so he is up there. But he's not the one that you are dealing with. The one you're dealing with is the Christ who lives within you. That resurrected Christ that let his body be broken, that he might live in everybody. And he lives in you. And he lives in the one that you're wanting to help. And the Christ in you can always reach out to the one that you're trying to help and minister. And the Christ in you knows how to help, knows the way, knows how to lead them in the right circumstances. He knows it all. But you have to be sensitive. You have to take time every day to be still and quiet and feed on his word, because we're led into his presence and into his truth, and he can speak to us better as we are reading his word, as we are meditating upon his word. He can bring us in larger understandings of his truth. That's all a part of this art of prayer. And we have to be humble enough to know we can't do it. You remember how many times Jesus let us know that of himself he could do nothing. It was the Father in him that did the work. I used my green pencil once and went through the book of John and just put a green mark under all those times when Jesus was showing us that it wasn't the one that they could see that was doing the work. It was that divine Spirit of the living God that indwelt him, to whom he was yielded, and the one that he was here making real and visible, it was that Spirit of God that was doing these things. Jesus was utterly humble, and we must be too. So if you're depending upon your education and your smartness and your talents and your personality and all these things that God gave us, and kind of thinking that you're pretty smart, you're pretty fine, that you've done this, he can't answer your prayer. You'll still have that thorn in your flesh like Paul had. Oh, which reminds me of the story I'll tell. You know, the Lord always does that kind of finagling around to see what story he wanted to tell. All right, after humility is love. Now, if we all loved God with our whole being, our heart, soul, mind, and strength, if we all loved everybody in his creation as Jesus loved them, always looking for the good in everybody instead of the ugly, always remembering that even in the vilest sinner there is that potential good, that potential Son of God, that light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world, and that is more eternal and strong than all the evil that's so visible. Jesus always looked beyond the evil and saw the good and magnified the good. Now, if we loved like that, there wouldn't be any question of the answers to our prayers, and we wouldn't have to think of any other laws, for love is the fulfilling of every law. Now, these things that I've talked about is a preparation for prayer. There's no use trying to get down on your knees and tell God all about how awful the problem is and pleading with him to do something about it if you haven't opened the door. And it takes that to open the door and make you one with him, one with all power in heaven and earth. Now, if you have done these things, you are committed and loving and humble, aware that he lives within you and he's going to do it. You don't have to even word it. He already knows. He already understands. He already wants the thing that's right and good more than you want it. So all you have to do is rejoice and give thanks and acknowledge it and adore him. That's the material he needs to answer our prayer. We've made the connection through knowing those laws, but the material God has to have to answer these needs are adoration, rejoicing, thanksgiving, praise. And oh, what he can do with that kind of material in our prayers. Now, when you've learned that, and it's as natural as breathing to come into his presence and bring any need, and you have no thought of how great it is, he uses you when you have no idea you're being used. I'd say most of the things that God does through me, he does without me knowing anything about it. Guidance is so very important in a Christian's life. And when your heart is attuned to his, he can guide you in every little detail. Nothing is ever too small for him to guide you in. And very often the things that look so very disappointing to you are God's biggest appointments. So don't get discouraged. You have no right to get discouraged. There isn't anything God can't take care of. So this happened about 3 years ago. The West Virginia camp is one of the new camps. And in the first 2 years, the West Virginia camp, they had the very same leaders as the Canoga, North Carolina camp. And they began just 2 days later than the North Carolina camp ended, giving them just the right time to travel from North Carolina up into West Virginia. Well, the next year, third year of the West Virginia camp, I was invited to be a leader in Canoga and a leader in West Virginia. And I thought, well, they're just following the same old pattern. I'm afraid I didn't notice the dates they gave me. I saw one was taking up the first week it was second week in September, and the other one was the third, and I didn't notice the beginning and ending dates. I was just so sure to the same old pattern that the same leaders go here, and then they get in the car, and they drive up there, and they have a full day to get there, and it's just fine. So I accepted both camps. Then when the fellowship messenger came out, I saw that instead of a day in between, they overlapped. And I was the only leader that was in both camps. So I thought, now, Lord, with you there is no overlapping. There's never but one right answer with you. Now, I can do both and do both well. What must I do? So I noticed that the leaders in the North Carolina camp were very strong leaders. They usually are. And they always have so many people in that camp that could easily be pressed into service. And I thought, well, now, what he'd like for me to do is to perhaps leave the Canoga camp a day early, because it's much more important to get a good start in your camp than it will follow through if you get the right start. So I thought, I've been in that Canoga camp so many times, why, they'll be very understanding. I just write them and tell them that I didn't realize I was letting it be overlapped. And would they be willing for me to make an extra talk earlier in the week and let me leave after my talk on the day before the end in order to get to the new camp? Well, I was so positive that they would. I was just sure of it. But lo, I get a letter back saying we're sorry, but we're a bigger camp, we're a more important camp, and we never let our camps down all the way to the end. We asked you before they did, and you'll have to stay to the end. They'd hit me with a baseball. I wouldn't have felt any different. I thought, well, now, what kind of a CFO spirit is this? Well, then I knew I had to write the West Virginia camp. So I wrote to the West Virginia camp, and I told them that how sorry I was. I hadn't realized that I had promised two that overlapped, but that I had written to Canoga to see if they'd release me, and they didn't feel they could. And I said, I know how important it is for a camp to get the right start. So I'll gladly step out and let you get a leader that can be there in the beginning and get the right kind of a start in your camp. But they wrote back and said, Ms. Eggleston, if you don't mind, come on, even though you're late. We have another good leader, and we'll let that other leader do double work till you get there, and then we'll let you do some double work. But you are advertised, and I think it'll be better if you come on. That'll be all right. Well, that was taken care of. So I finished up in the Canoga camp. I stayed to the bitter end. And after it was all over, why, I took a plane and flew to, I had to change a couple of times to get up there to Charleston. And then someone met me, and we had to drive about 100 miles to get to the camp. And we got in just before midnight. And the secretary said, now, I know you've had a busy day traveling, and you'll be late getting to bed tonight. Don't try to come to the meditation in the morning. A minister is going to lead the meditation in the morning, but you just come to breakfast, and then after breakfast we'll have the council ring meeting, but you will be the morning speaker. Just be ready for your morning talk. Well, that sounded very nice, and so I obeyed orders. I went to breakfast, and everybody was seated. Everybody looked fine and healthy and happy, and just like CFOers should. And then they asked that they let the council members be served first so we could go to our council meeting. So we were served first, and we went to our council meeting, and we went from the council meeting right into the auditorium, and they were all seated and looking happy. And I went up in the pulpit, and I started out laying my foundations for prayer. For I always begin where I think we have to begin. We have to begin with these solid foundations. Now, always in any camp or in any retreat or anywhere, I always begin on the things that are unshakable. Well, I wasn't talking very long on my foundation when the Lord said, tell about Paul's thorn in the flesh. Well, now, I thought I'm getting some wrong orders here now. The Lord isn't telling me in a first lecture in a new camp to talk about Paul's thorn in the flesh. So I tried to act as though I hadn't received any inner order like that. But that order kept coming through, tell about Paul's thorn in the flesh. Well, when you get an inner order, you obey. And so I said, I'm being told within to talk about Paul's thorn in the flesh. I don't know why. But I said, I don't know why we are all so sure that it's physical. Or if you'll get your concordance and look it up, there's several times in the Old Testament where thorn in the flesh is mentioned. And it's never physical. It's usually somebody that's irritating you or gets on your nerves. And that's your thorn in the flesh. But I said, granted that it was something physical. It's only mentioned in Paul's earliest book. He doesn't talk anymore about the thorn in his flesh in his later books. Why, in his later books, he runs the gamut of the things that could happen to him in the closing verses of the 8th chapter of Romans. And he said, can these things separate us from the love of God? And he comes back with a ringing no. In all these things we are more than conquerors through Christ. And so I repeated quite a number of these all-embracing statements that showed that there wasn't any limitations of Paul in his later books. Why, he was saying, for me to live is for Christ to live. Can you imagine Christ living with a thorn in his flesh? Well, I saw people nudging each other and looking at each other curious, and I thought, well, these are funny people out here in West Virginia, aren't they? I never saw that happen in other camps. But I was glad to drop that old thorn in the flesh and get back on my foundation. So I went back to my foundation. And I was really digging in when the Lord said, tell a story about Parkinson's. Well, I tried to say, well, Lord, not in my first lecture. You just don't jump out and tell big stories like that unless they know the things that are necessary before you tell of a big miracle. But he kept on saying, tell a story about Parkinson's. So I wound it away around some way and began to weave it in, and I told of being in the Oklahoma camp. And they had asked all the leaders to get there a day early, and we had. But when we got there, we found this woman. Her sister had brought her. She was in a wheelchair. She couldn't feed herself. She couldn't walk. She couldn't use her hands to help herself. But her sister had brought her because she felt that she brought her to that camp, and the leaders would pray for her that she could come out of this condition. And she was there waiting for us before the leaders even arrived. So when I got there, this sister said, I brought my sister here for prayer. Would you pray for her? Well, you know, I never pray for anyone for anything like that until I know they are ready to cooperate. For God does not break his own laws. We have to meet them. And so I said, well, come on, bring her in my room and let's talk this over. And if she's ready to cooperate, why, what a joy it'll be to pray for her. And it's not too hard for God. For I've seen many a one in the very last stages of Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis and polio and all these other things come back to wholeness. So when we brought her in and she was there, I said, who's dominating you? And the sister looked at me and said, how did you know? Well, I said, I don't know anything about your sister, but I know what causes Parkinson's. For I've been meeting with these psychosomatic doctors ever since 45. And I do know the emotional things that cause many of our so-called incurable diseases. Nothing is incurable when we realize the causes and can overcome the causes. And every single one of these diseases that gets beyond medical skill has begun in your emotions. And I knew enough to know that I've never seen a Parkinson's case in my life, that it wasn't a person who's dominated by someone else, that's never had a chance to really express themselves and be what God wanted them to be. Now, rarely, but it has been known, that instead of being a dominated person, it is a domineering person who dominates everyone else. But that's rare. 99 times out of every 100, it's a soul that has never been able to express herself or himself. Someone else made all their decisions and told them what to do and how to do it. So when I said, who's dominating you? The sister said, our mother. Our mother never permitted us to make one decision for ourselves. Never. If we put on a blue dress without asking her, she made us go change it and put on the red dress. If we fixed our hair one way and hadn't said, how shall I fix my hair this morning, she made you go and change it and fix it the way she wanted it. She absolutely made every decision for us three girls. There were three of us, she said. Now, she said, the two older ones, my sister and I, we just decided we weren't going to be dominated. And we would steal out and do the things we wanted, but said this sister was always too nice and too mild and too gentle and too sweet. She wouldn't resist Mother. She did anything that Mother wanted, but inside she was boiling. Now, we didn't boil. We just went out and did it. So we didn't boil. That's what causes Parkinson's. She said, I don't care what the young man, how fine he was. If we made a date without asking her if we could make that date, he was just the wrong guy, and she wouldn't let him come in the house. And so Sister and I ran away and got married. We just did our dating outside, and we both ran away to get married. But this sister's never had a date because there never was anybody that Mother thought measured up. And this sister sat there with the tears rolling down her cheeks while the sister told of the commission. I said, well, Mother's still domineering? I said, yes, Mother's still domineering. Mother's an invalid, has a nurse, has nurses around the clock, but even though she can't do a thing for herself, she still makes every decision for this dear sister. Well, I said, she'll never be any better unless she finds the way to do as she chooses and make her own decisions. And, she really cried now, for she didn't think she had the strength to do it. Well, her sister said, I have the answer. Mother doesn't need her. She can do one thing to help Mother. She's another care on the nurses. I'm taking her home with me. And anything under the sun she wants, she's going to have. I'll give her anything. I'll take her anywhere because she's never had a chance to be herself. I'll see that she has a chance. Well, we talked for quite a while, and I made her see, if you all want a book, bring that old book over here, How to Live 365 Days a Year. How many of you ministers are familiar with that book? Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? There's a doctor that knows that every one of these things that are incurable began in the spirit, in the emotions, in the thinking, are something that can so easily be yielded and overcome. Just as soon as you get rid of the cause, everything within you begins to rebuild. And your body is rebuilt every 3.5 months if you're relaxed and loving and humble and kind and just letting Christ live in you. I think this is the book I would rather have next to the Bible. I believe Dr. Schindler has done more to help me than any other one person. And it's most all case histories, and it takes all of these so-called incurable diseases, and it shows you how he dealt with them. Now, if it's cancer, he knew exactly what to look for. If it's diabetes, he knew exactly what to look for. If it's epilepsy, he knows exactly what to look for. He makes them see it is here, there is a cause. We live in a world of cause and effect. You'll never be any better till you get rid of the cause. But when you get rid of the cause, the old effect will take care of itself. Well, we had a wonderful time talking together, and she saw it, and this sister said, I'm going to give her a chance to be the person that she'd like to be. And this dear girl admitted that while she submitted to everything the mother said, that everything within her was boiling all the time because she was resenting it. She wanted to be free. She wanted to do like others, but here she was now, helpless. Well, that sister was the sweetest thing to her I've ever seen. She took her to watch the rhythm. She took her in the art. She couldn't do any of them, but she could watch others and catch the joy of the others. Of course, she listened to all the lectures, and we tried to say the things that would help her and strengthen her. Well, she went home. You couldn't see any change in this because God doesn't do things magically. He does it naturally and in order. But we knew that the change had taken place within her. We knew she was going to be all right. Now, they let me hear from her for quite a while. And I knew she was responding. I knew the mother had died and was no longer a problem. It wasn't hurting her conscience anymore, that she was with the sister and had run out on the mother. And that would have been quite an item against her recovery. because she was such a sensitive soul, it would have hurt her to think that she wasn't going back to Mother. But the Lord took the mother home, and, well, I knew she was just doing fine. 13 months later, I was a leader in the Arkansas camp. And when I arrived, this lovely person came up, and she was smiling. She said, "Do you know me?" So I didn't recognize her. She didn't look like the same person to me. And I said, "Well, where have I seen you?" She said, "In the Oklahoma camp." I said, "It was a big camp, wasn't it?" She said, "Miss Eggleston, don't you recognize me?" Well, I said, "Tell me something about yourself, and maybe I will." She said, "I'm the person that was in the wheelchair last year." I never would have recognized her. There wasn't any shadow of her ever having had Parkinson's. She took the rhythm, she did the art, she did everything anybody else did. Completely well. Well, I told that story, and all the time I was talking, I saw people looking at each other queer and nudging each other. I thought, well, this is the funniest camp I've ever been in. I didn't know what I was doing, though. But then after I finished the story, I had a few more minutes, and I tried to sum up these laws. And when I had the little amen prayer, why, a woman dashed up into the pulpit, and she said, "Miss Eggleston, is it always true that it's domination that causes Parkinson's?" Well, I said, "I've never seen any other cause, and I've seen lots of cases." "Why, do you know someone?" She said, "Didn't you know my husband is here in the last stages?" And I said, "No, I just landed at midnight last night, and I didn't know who was in my audience." I thought if I'd gotten there on time, the Lord would have had an awful time making me tell these stories and do what he made me do. And she said, "You weren't in the meditation this morning?" And I said, "No, they told me to sleep late," and I did. Said, "You contradicted everything my husband said this morning in the meditation." Well, I said, "I'm just awfully sorry. What did I contradict?" Said, "Well, the ones who brought him here said our people just loved him so much. And he had been told, said, we just loved him to the extent that people in the church said if as long as he could even sit and preach, they'd keep him as their minister. And for the last 6 months, he has preached sitting down in the pulpit. But now his voice was going back, and so the district superintendent had told him that he would have to take his pulpit away from him. He would have to have someone else take his place. And the people said, well, won't you just let him wait till conference meets? Give him this 6 months. We'll gladly take just what he can offer, and don't take it away from him till conference meets. And so the district superintendents, knowing how they loved him, said, all right. And they said, we're going to take you to camp. We'll take you where they believe in prayer, and you're not going to have to give up your pulpit. So his people had brought him there. Now, these same people, wanting him to feel that he could be real useful in the camp, had asked the secretary to let him lead the devotional that morning. And so they had propped him up in his chair up on the pulpit, and his talk was that this is my thorn in the flesh. This is a thorn in my flesh. And like Paul, I have been praying for months and months for the Lord to take this away from me, but he's let me know that his strength is sufficient and that I will have to endure it to the end. And lo and behold, I contradicted everything the poor dear had said. And then I told the story showing that he was dominated. Well, of course, everybody there knew it but me. I was the only ignorant one in the whole bunch, and they were having a field day at my expense. And, well, I said, is it true? Is he dominated? She said, yes, I'm his wife. But I didn't start it. Said, his mother told me when we were engaged, and said Mother had a lot to do with our engagement. That I'm a graduate of Scarrett, and I was a director of religious education. And Mother prayed him into the pulpit, and then Mother made his sermons, and Mother dictated everything. And then Mother arranged for our wedding because she knew what a help I could be to him, and she wasn't going to live forever. And so she told me, she said, now you will have to help him. He's just never made a decision in his life. And you will just have to do this. So she said, I took up where Mother left off. And he's been so kind and so gentle and so sweet that he never acted as though he didn't want me to do that. Well, I said, you know that on the inside he was boiling and this wouldn't have happened to him. So I said, now, will you promise me this? That no matter what he does, make him think it's the smartest thing anybody ever did in all their lives. It might be diabolically wrong, but you tell him that's the nicest thing anybody ever decided to do. And you just praise him for everything. You've got to bring back to that man now faith in himself. Make him know that Christ is there and Christ is going to lead him and it's going to be wonderful. He said, I surely will, because he is the sweetest man. There isn't anybody that doesn't adore him, and I adore him too. And I said, all right then, you adore him right back the whole. Well, of course, the whole camp knew about it now. The whole thing was out, and so the whole camp just got underneath that man to just pour love on him and have him to do everything. And no matter what we had him do, why, it was just the nicest in the world. We had him lead a prayer group, and it was just wonderful. Well, we knew that when he left, he looked just the same, except the radiance in his face, but we knew he was going to get well. Now, that was in September. The following May, I had meetings in, I think, the Trinity Methodist Church in Bluefield, West Virginia, and this man's church was just about 35 miles away. Oh, he still had his church all right. And when I got there, why, N.W. Looney, we all call him Norfolk and Western Looney, because Bluefield is quite a Norfolk and Western town. His initials were N&W. Anyhow, I was in N&W's church, and he said, I've got a surprise for you this evening. Our friend is going to bring his whole evening service over and meet with us, and we're going to have one side of the church reserved just for him and his church. Well, we had the morning service, and when it came to the evening, here he came in leading his group, no signs of Parkinson's. It had been from September until May. So I said, come right on up in the pulpit. Don't you stop down there. You come on up here. I want everybody to see our miracle. So he came up in the pulpit, and he made the prayer, and he had come back to perfect wholeness. Now, you see, the Lord had used that overlapping in my ignorance in order to work a miracle. If I'd been there in the beginning, I'd have known him. I'd have known that he was there, and the Lord would have had an awful time making me the studious thorn in the flesh and these other things that needed to be done. And yet, I wouldn't have had the grace to have done it if I'd known what I was doing. So prayer, God guides you and uses you when you have no idea you're being used. And it is a great and glorious experience. Now, what do you want? Because we might have one more story, or how about asking some questions? Do you want to ask some questions? If you think healing isn't coming back in the church, you just change your mind. The tide is coming.
Paralysis is due to some physical or mental condition too?
Yes, anything that gets, well, stroke comes from living tensely, and when you learn to live relaxed and confident. The great healing powers are love, or nothing but in your heart but love for God and everyone. That's the greatest. That's got to be. And then joy and peace. Now, you have to let that love dwell in your heart for yourself. God isn't going to make you do that. But in the upper room, Jesus willed us his joy and his peace. And it's yours just as though he wrote your name in his will and said, I give to you, Miriam Jones, or whoever you are, my joy and my peace. But if you don't take hold of it, it doesn't do you any good. Someone told you somebody left you $1 million in the bank and all you had to do is draw it, and you didn't believe it, it wouldn't do you a bit of good, would it? But if you believed it and went there and drew on it, why, it's yours. Well, it takes love first. God cannot work a miracle if there's anything unloving in here. Anything that you're holding against anyone, or any hard feeling, any resentment, that's all got to be given back to God and let Him take over and fill you with His love. And it's a love that's letting Him direct it. But then you've got to let that peace that He proved was unshakable. He could stand before Pilate. He could let them lie upon Him and crown Him with thorns and mock Him and jeer Him and beat Him. He didn't lose that peace. And we don't have to lose it either. And then He said, all these things that I've given unto you, I've given that my joy might be in you, and your joy be full. And here He was facing Gethsemane in the cross and talking about His joy. And we can face Gethsemane in our crosses too, and keep that joy and that peace, if we know He lives in us. But you've got to know it and count upon it, and hold it in your life. You've got it to do.
I suspect that my classification is along about the same as the characters that you referred to that our Lord chose. Something that you said rankled me, though.
All right, what is it? Let's hear it.
I think it will you.
All right, fine.
You mentioned that healing coming back to the church, and don't forget it. I think that healing has never left the church. It never has left Christ. I think we've left the healing.
Oh, bless your heart. That's right. I meant to say that, didn't I? No, it's never left it. There's always...
I don't mean this to be...
I know that. I know that.
I believe in it very
it's always
very
been there.
deeply.
It's always been.
I think that the thought should lay the way it...
Well, I think you're exactly right, and I stand corrected. No, I don't have to forgive you. You forgive me, but it is going, it's going to be, any church that isn't practicing it is going to show that it has no power. We're just taking part of His gospel. We're not following Him all the way. But we're going to be practicing it in the future far more than we've been practicing. Thank you for that.
This first requirement which you mentioned is this loving spirit. Would you explain the steps by which you attain this or receive it?
Well, I know how I had to get it. I think you have to get that in the quietness, alone with God. I think we fail more there than anywhere else. We'll feed this body. We'll take time every day to feed our bodies, and we should. For our bodies are temples where the living Christ lives, and He certainly wants His temples healthy and radiant and joyous and vital. We need that. But this old body is just for this one life. And our souls are for all eternity. And yet we take time every day to feed the bodies, and so many never take time to feed the soul. Now we feed the soul as we are alone with God and with His Word. And as you read, let Him speak to you through His spoken word, through His Word, and lead you on into deeper understandings of His truth. Jesus said, I have so much to tell you, but you're not able to bear it. You just won't open your hearts and minds and receive it. You just don't believe it. You don't take hold of it. But oh, we're coming into these great truths today. We are in a new day. And I'll be talking more about that tonight. And we've got to take hold of these things. And there is no other way to receive this power and this inner knowing that leads us into all truth and sets us free, except taking time every day to be alone in His presence and be filled and be directed, and then you've got to be obedient. Dr. George Washington Carver found out how to do it. You know, when he was a little boy, when he was born at the end of the Civil War, when people down in the deep South were all hungry. For what the Yankees couldn't kill, they destroyed or burned, or they did their best, and the people in the South were left hungry, all of them. Now, his colored mother was hungry. All the time she was carrying him. So he came in the world a little undernourished, half-starved baby. He told me this, for I spent from 8:30 in the morning till 1:30 in the afternoon with him without any telephone bills or any interruptions. He told me this. He said, I cried the whole first year of my life. I just didn't stop crying. I was hungry, and I just cried. And he said when I was about a year old, the carpetbaggers came down and would drive the Negroes north, just like you drive herds of cattle. And my mother, with me in her arms, was among those that were being driven north. And the one in charge of her group saw that I hadn't stopped crying all day long. And so when we passed the swamp, they just took me out of her arms and dropped me in the swamp and led them on. Now the Carver family, a white family, lived near that swamp and heard the baby's cries. It wasn't enough water to drown him, and the rushes were soft enough to kept him from breaking his bones. The Carver family rescued him. Now they didn't have any more than they didn't have as much as they needed, but they were a wonderful Christian family. They took him in and made him one of their family. They shared their little with him. Everything they had, they shared with him. But he said the greatest thing they shared with me was their love for Jesus. That Jesus was as much a part of that family as any member of the family. And that every day in the family hour, when they'd read the Bible, why, they made Jesus so real that you knew that he was there. They made you understand that Jesus cared. He was able to meet your needs when you trusted him. Now, in the South, in those days, there were no elementary schools. You learned that in the home. Your old maid aunt or your mother or somebody taught you in the home. And then when you went to school, you had to pay for it. Now, he said, I got all the elementary training in that Christian home. I had the chance to know how real Jesus is, how much he cared, and that he had made everybody for his purpose, and that was a great purpose. But they let me know that they would not have money to pay to send me to school, but that they knew that God wanted me to be a person and to fulfill my plan. And so they would pray with me daily for God to open the way for me to go to school. He was named George Washington because they didn't call him anything but Babe until he could talk, and they found out when he could talk, he always told the truth, even though he knew that he was going to get a whipping for telling something that he did that he shouldn't have done. So they named him George Washington, and their name, Carver. But through that wonderful faith and that recognition that Christ was caring and able, he said he told Jesus one day, if you will help me to get an education, I will promise to give you 2 hours of my time every day, knowing you and knowing your truth. And he said right then, in the Carver home, I sat from 5 till 7 in the morning. And he told me, and this was the year before he died, he said, ever since those childhood days, I have never failed to be alone with God from 5 till 7 in the morning. Now, he said in the beginning, I spent all those 2 hours studying his word, listening for him to interpret his truth to me, and then the door opened, for him to come to Iowa to school. He lived in the home of Henry Wallace's father when baby Henry was a baby. Henry Wallace was a baby. And he did the chores in the family and took care of baby Wallace, and cut the grass and so forth. But they gave him his education. And he said, when I got there, I realized my mind wasn't keen like other people. I hadn't been nourished like other people. And so my thinking was dull, and it was hard for me to understand and remember. So he said, I would always begin at 5 o'clock reading God's Word. But I would always have all the lessons that I was going to have for the day with me. And after I'd read God's Word, then I would say, now, help me to study arithmetic. Help me to understand these things and help me to remember. You do it. with me and through me. And he said it was Christ in me that quickened my mind and gave me understanding and helped me to remember.